Good evening and welcome to another Lantern's Quest podcast. This is episode 26 as we're continuing through what we're calling a Sketchbook of Christ, that is the Gospel of Mark. And you saw in the introduction there our sponsors, so please do visit their websites, make contact with them, and as you do make contact with them, let them know that you saw them on our podcast so that we can know that people are getting information from what it is that we're doing here. So let me welcome our co-host, Pastor Lucas from Reformation Bible
Hello.
Presbyterian Church. How are you doing, Pastor Lucas?
We're doing great. We're all feeling a lot healthier than we were a couple weeks ago.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And also Pastor David Barrett from Wellsprings Church. How are you doing, David?
Doing well. It's good to be here tonight.
All right. I think we're going to maybe just dive straight in. One thing I did want to ask about, let me see about Sharon. I think we talked a little bit about this last time. We were in Mark chapter 8, if you need to know where we're at. I think we pretty much talked through the first 10 verses, the feeding of the 4,000 here. And at the end of that 10th verse, it talks about the disciples and Jesus entering a boat and coming into the parts of Dalmanutha. Did we ever decide where Dalmanutha is located?
Yeah. It's on the western shore near Magdala.
Yeah, it's north of
Okay.
Magdala, south of Capernaum.
It's that whole valley region right near Magdala. There's a big valley there. Would be probably a lot of farming and civilization going on.
Okay. Yeah, I was just looking on my bird's eye view, and in kind of the timeline, he's got Dalmanutha. He indicates Dalmanutha being located in Galilee, but he didn't have it labeled on the map, so I didn't know if that was a controversy or just
Matthew gives in his account some helps in mentioning Magdala
okay.
as part of the region. I think Lucas also looked some things up on that last time. But yeah, that's where this is at. So he's leaving what would be a Gentile region. And I think it's significant that his trip into the Gentile regions up into Tyre, Sidon, and across and over to Decapolis. And I look at it as the time when he was ministering principally to Gentiles. That it begins with, it appears reluctant, but a promise of the crumbs to the Gentiles. And it ends with a replication of the feeding of the 5,000 to the feeding of the 4,000, the feeding of the 5,000, which are principally Jews, to the feeding of the 4,000, which are primarily Gentiles. And it's almost like the picture of the slight spilling over the gospel to the Gentiles and the abundant breaking forth of receiving the gospel by the Gentiles that's going to take place once the church is commissioned and sent out. So anyway, I just kind of like that bookend crumbs to what it says in Mark 8, 8. So they ate and were filled. That word is satisfied to mean that they could not take any more. They're completely satisfied. So just a few things I was thinking about that I wanted to throw in there on that part of it.
Well, you kind of described a larger Markan sandwich that Lucas has
the
talked
Markan
about
sandwich.
before.
Literally bread on both ends.
That's
Speaking my
good.
language here.
That's good. Okay. Now the other thing that I don't know if it's the other thing, I guess it's just a thing that I will remind us of is that kind of bigger picture of where Jesus is headed right now, we're kind of in a period where his intent is eventually to get to Caesarea Philippi, right? And because that's going to be a pretty significant teaching moment between Jesus and the disciples. In fact, in my bird's eye view, he essentially looks to me like his Caesarea Philippi is maybe 2 events away from ending up in Dalmanutha. So he's got it in the same month. He says this is in the month of August AD 29 that we're in right now. So we're very much nearing that event. All right. Any other preliminary thoughts either of you want to share before we dive into our outline for today?
Let's do it.
All right. Okay, so we're gonna start with just a few verses here. We'll start at verse 10 and read through verse 13, and we'll take what we see there. In the outline, I've labeled this the impertinent question. Let's see if that's really true. Starting verse 10. And forthwith he, that's Jesus, entered into a boat with his disciples and came into the parts of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came forth and began to question with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, tempting him. And he, that is Jesus, sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, there shall no sign be given to this generation. And he left them, and entering the boat again, departed to the other side. All right, so here we have just a few verses, but pretty significant. I mean, the ending of verse 11 tells us that there's a particular motive of these Pharisees, right? That the particular motive they have in regards to the question they bring. So, Lucas, maybe you want to start there and give some thoughts on what's happening here.
Everybody who's been reading this so far is dumbfounded when they come to verse 11, because these guys, they come clearly with a purpose to dispute with Christ. And the second phrase here, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. Their motives are questionable at best. These are the religious leaders. So it is certainly not, it's reasonable for Jesus to be frustrated with them, that they don't seem to care. These people are the ones who should be looking for the messianic hope that the scriptures testify of, and these guys are looking for a sign. What has been going on this whole time? There's thousands of people who get it, and these guys don't get it. This is a stark contrast, and this is very much what you get throughout the Gospel of John. I think it's really, the Gospel of John is interesting, and I like people to read it because it is a little less Hebraic. Mark and Matthew and have a lot of the Hebraic sort of like storytelling that I think sometimes goes over our modern heads. But you get this sort of like antagonism all throughout the Gospel of John between the Pharisees and Jesus. But here it's the contrast is really striking, because you see Jesus doing sign after sign after sign, resurrecting, healing, spitting in people's ears and making touching the string of their tongue, as we just read in chapter 7. And multiple times. This is the second time he's fed thousands of people from just a few fish, a few loaves of bread. And these guys are willfully deaf and dumb, I guess you could say, right? He just healed this guy who'd been, deaf and dumb from birth, legitimately, physically having a malady in his mouth, a speech impediment. And these guys are deaf and dumb by in their spirit. So that's what really stands out here. And the seeking after a sign um, just just shows that they have this stubborn opposition. This one of the commentaries say it says intractable opposition. So there's if you didn't know what intractable meant, now you know. It's the stubborn, willfulness.
It's not a we can't understand, it's we won't understand kind of a position, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and it says they're testing it. It's like a lawyer, right? It's like you phrase the question in such a way to catch people out
Right,
in some things, so you can use it against them in a court of law.
right. When did
Um,
you stop beating your wife kind of question?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly
And
right.
it may be that they are asking for something unique here. Um, Matthew says that this kind of interaction occurred earlier. Matthew has this particular interaction recorded as well. But in Matthew chapter 12, there were scribes and Pharisees that said, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." And Jesus will respond similarly as he does here. That's an adulterous generation that seeks a sign, and no sign will be given. But he goes on to say, except for Jonah, sign of Jonah, and we talk about that in a bit. But here it's Pharisees, and Matthew says Sadducees. So it's two groups that really are contentious with one another. The only times they come together are in the Sanhedrin and when they're facing Jesus. Otherwise, they're antagonistic towards each other. But they're asking for a sign from heaven. And some commentators speculate that they're saying, bring something down from heaven, kind of reflecting back on what they would have maybe been told, that when he was baptized, a dove came down from heaven, a voice came out from heaven. And it may be that they're pressing for something even more unique here. Um, though I'm with you on all that you're saying, they've even seen him cast out demons. They've seen they have witnesses within their ranks that have seen a number of miracles. If these particular ones that are questioning hadn't seen it, so I agree with the sentiment that they are willfully not wanting to accept. But it's possible also that they're pressing for something even more here, just to test Jesus, as it
Well,
says.
isn't isn't one of the things, maybe not in Mark, but one of the signs from heaven is the bread of heaven, right? The manna that comes down. Isn't that one of the
Oh yeah,
signs? And the point is, well, Jesus is that sign. He is the one from heaven, right? I mean,
right.
they're talking to the sign from heaven, and they're wanting a sign from heaven.
And that may be why he has such a deep sigh here, because it's
Right.
like,
That's the next thing I want us to talk about, because we talked about Jesus' sigh in Mark 7, and we said, well, that was we saw in that his compassion for someone. What's this
right,
sigh here?
when he was healing the deaf and mute, or actually stammering tongue individual, right?
So
Yeah,
what is
I don't
this
know.
sigh
Well,
denoting here?
yeah, this is written as sighed deeply. It's kind of interesting that he has these deep sighs in both places. The Greek word here has the same base as the side in Mark 7, but a prefix is put to it, and that makes it, its own unique word. And this is the only place that word appears in all of Scripture. Okay. And it's like the Greek prefix that's put to it, ana, I suppose is how it's pronounced. A and A is the transliteration, but it means to rise up from deep. So it even adds, I think it's as much, if not more, of a groaning and sigh, more probably not in compassion, but in disgust. than even back in Mark 7.
Lucas, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, sometimes these prepositions are used sort of as intensifiers, like
Right.
big, big sigh, or um, that I think is usually translated here as deeply. So yeah, this was a big sigh. But notice what it also says, that it's in the pneumatos, in his spirit, and there's such a conflict here between the spiritual and it's a spiritual battle, is what I'm trying to say. That there's real spiritual warfare going on, and Jesus is realizing that this is a spiritual attack. And if you think about it, Jesus, right after we talked about, when he was baptized, that there was a sign came down from heaven. Maybe they're looking for something like this again. But also right after that, he went into a time of temptation by the devil. And so this could be reminiscent of that, right? Like, I know that there's a bunch of people that want me to become a king in a sort of uh, blasé sense, not in like the ultimate kingship that I'm used to having as I sit on the throne of heaven and rule all of creation, but just sort of like this like mediocre sort of kingdom, like over a tiny little piece of land. But these people are looking for signs, maybe like Elijah, like let's see, call some fire down from heaven. But they're seeking for signs. But really, what we're seeing is that there's a spiritual blindness. So it's interesting. He says, "Verily, I say to you," which is sort of when he says that, he says he usually gives some sort of like existential truth, like that revealing like the will of God. There shall be no sign given to this generation. But he does give signs in a sense. Like I think what he's saying is, obviously his signs and wonders, his miracles. But he's not going to give them the signs that they're looking for, right?
Right.
And he's going to, the greatest sign is the sign of the resurrection, right? Like everybody's going to have the opportunity to see that in a sense. He's going to appear to many disciples after he's resurrected, but there's going to continue to be a bit of a messianic secret even after the resurrection. That's part of the crisis after the resurrection 3 days later on the road to Emmaus in Luke, is Jesus coming back? Did somebody steal the body? What's going on here? So God leaves open the door for those who are persistent, stubborn in their disbelief to remain there. And it's a scary place to be. You should really be careful about being too skeptical and too unwilling to believe anything, because you could end up being like these guys. You could end up being super religious, but really missing the boat.
Right. I kind of like what John Gill writes here on that phrase. He sighed deeply in his spirit. He writes, in his human soul, speaking about Jesus, in his human soul, and which shows that he had one, and was subject to grief and sorrow and all passions and infirmities excepting sin. This deep sigh was on account of the hardness of their hearts, the malignity of their minds, and insincerity of their intentions, who had no view to come at truth by this inquiry, but to ensnare him.
Right.
I think
The
that's a nice
question
little
was to
summary.
test him.
Yeah.
It says there. Yeah, I think this deep groaning sigh from his spirit had much to do with who he's facing here. People who are just impertinent. He is very disgusted with them, and he says
Sure.
no sign will be given.
But I wouldn't say that this sigh is necessarily absent compassion either. I think that there is always compassion with Christ. I think about I think it's the young ruler who comes and ends up going away, and the scriptures tell us that Jesus loved him, and the guy still goes away, right?
Yeah,
So
but he didn't come testing Jesus.
sure,
He
sure.
couldn't handle the answers from Jesus. And yeah, I think there's a difference. I don't know.
Okay.
Does the compassion
There's some
towards those
similarity.
who have continual hardness of heart always, is it always extended? At some point, they're going to fall in dramatic judgment for this position.
You're the pastor. I'm just the guy over here on this side of the screen. So, uh, one thing I did want to bring up, David, you mentioned, I think you were maybe referencing this or a similar event in Matthew, and you
Yes,
said the phrase, this adulterous generation. So, just so that there's no confusion, when it says adulterous generation, it's not necessarily saying they're sexually promiscuous, right? This is a spiritual adultery that's being talked about. Is that
definitely. He calls them even an adulterous generation when the scribes and Pharisees ask for a sign. And then here in this incident where we're talking about, and Matthew says some Sadducees are with him and they're testing him and asking for a sign from heaven, he will call them a wicked and adulterous generation. And it is spiritually being articulated here. Definitely. Idolatry is spiritual adultery.
okay?
And they were idolizing their Judaism, which we have heard and read, I should say, had so many of the traditions that even superseded and dismissed the very law of God. They worshipped their system. They didn't worship the true God and his word.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to make sure that listeners would know that, it's not that um, there may have been none sexual promiscuity going on in that particular group, right? But it doesn't change the fact that they are spiritually idolatrous, is what.
yeah. No, that's idolatry is spiritual adultery in
All
scripture.
right. Okay, so in verse 13 it says, he left them, Jesus left them. I'm assuming that them there is the Pharisees, and entered into the boat again, departed to the other side. So if this is in the parts of Dalmanutha, say the left side of the Sea of Galilee, as you look at the map, this would suggest he's kind of going to the right side or to the east side maybe of Galilee. Is that what we should understand here?
The other
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
Yeah.
They left the east side, came to the west side, had this encounter, and they turned around and went
A
back.
different side. Could be the south side or the north side.
Sure, just at the other side, whatever that means, right? Um, all right. Anything else from those few verses there, or
Well, I would just say, I mean, if people want to read in Matthew, it's in Matthew 16. There's a little more expanded interaction that goes on between Christ and these. I think what Mark is emphasizing is, immediately, I mean, he cuts him off, no sign, and immediately he turns and leaves. It's almost like, I'm going to go back into Galilee and test the waters, and they are still, especially the leadership, is hardness of heart, and he leaves. And it's like shaking off the dust off your feet action almost here. Now in Matthew, he does say that Jesus actually tells them, he gives them an illustration from the heavens, meaning you look at the sky and think you can predict things, and you don't know spiritual things. That whole, red at night, sailor's delight type of thing is spoken of. And then he says, the only sign you're getting is the sign of Jonah the prophet. And then he leaves, which was the sign of who he was. Paul in Romans 1 is going to say that he was declared to be the Son of God by the resurrection. And so he did not give them any sign they wanted. He only proclaimed the preordained sign that God had already established was going to happen. and left. He didn't do it for them, but he told them what they should recognize when it happens. So that'd be Matthew's addition to it.
Okay. Now, you know how I like to see what I like to see in our stories in the Bible here. So I think it's interesting that Mark 8, not that the original authors wrote in chapters or anything, but Mark 8 here starts with the feeding, which important part of that feeding is the bread, right? The Pharisees demand a sign, and I mentioned that, one sign that they seemed to rely upon was the manna, the bread coming from heaven, and Jesus connects himself with that sign. And now we get to verse 14, and it's going to be more about bread. Do you see what I'm doing there, right? Where we're building a pile of bread or whatever.
No, I see what you're doing there is you're pointing out Mark's thematic writing here.
Okay. So, all right. So let's go to verse 14. We could think of this as the leaven of the Pharisees, although this heading includes Herod, which that's an interesting. I mean, David, you were talking about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and their relationship with one another. I mean, the Pharisees and Herod, I'm assuming, typically not,
No,
lunch guests, right?
I think they came together one time a little bit earlier in Mark.
Yeah, I think we did read about that
And
earlier.
so,
But yeah,
they're not spoken of as much, but yeah, they're at least
it's an odd pairing based
it is
on
a very
their
odd pairing.
positions. All right, we'll start here at verse 14. Now the disciples had.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lucas, did you have a
You're going to
comment?
read it?
I was going to read from verse 14. Is that?
Go ahead.
All right. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the boat with them more than one loaf. And Jesus charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have no bread." And when Jesus knew it, he said to them, "Why reason you because you have no bread? Perceive you not yet, neither understand? Have you your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see you not? Having ears, hear you not? And do you not remember? When I divided the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up?" They said to him, 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took you up? And they said, 7. And he said to them, "How is it that you do not understand?" Okay, honestly, I'm kind of feeling like one of the disciples as I just read through that. So hopefully,
Yeah,
Lucas,
Mark
if you want.
doesn't really explain it, does he?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not sure I understand, but I feel like I'm in pretty good company being a disciple, right?
Let's
So
continue on with this discussion of Pharisees and Herod. Both of these are manifesting themselves as those who are corrupt. Herod is, foreign ruler. He's nominally king of the Jews, but he's really actually not even of the Jews. He's not a Jew. He's not Jewish. He is of the line of Esau, of Edom. He's an Edomite. So, but he's also very worldly. And what he's saying is these guys are just as worldly, like their way of reasoning, their hearts are worldly, right? So friendship with the world is enmity with God, which is what First John points out, that if you love the world, you're going to become an enemy of God. So that's what the Pharisees have clearly done. They've demonstrated that they're antagonistic. And Jesus is noticing something among the disciples. They just lived through a couple different miracles of bread proliferating and God providing, right, to many. And the disciples of verse 14 are saying, "Well, we forgot to bring bread. We're going to be hungry tonight," right? And So I mean, they're literally there with Jesus, and if he wanted them to get bread, he could have reminded them to get bread. He gives them instructions to take swords and not take swords, and take this and take that for the journey, but they're on the road. They're in the ministry. They're depending upon people where they go. But I think what he's really pointing out here is that there's a tendency towards worldliness, like seeing things from a worldly perspective. And he's not. He's saying you guys are worried about not having bread. And they're saying it's because we have no bread. Like he's saying that we did something wrong here, like we didn't get enough bread, and what he's saying is, you don't remember what just happened like a day ago? Like we had all this food that was divided from how many loaves or how many baskets were left over at the end? 5 loaves, five for 5,000 people, 4,000 people, many baskets of fragments. So they're they're we do this probably every week. We go to church and we hear about miracles. Jesus is doing the stuff we hear about. God's Jehovah Rapha. We debate. The pastor has to say, does he have the power to heal anymore? Does he heal? Does he not heal? Is that just a charlatan's trick to make money and to preach a prosperity gospel? Give me money and I'll heal you, sort of a thing. Um, but but God is a God of power. He's a God who brings manna from heaven. Jesus is the manna from heaven. Jesus is going to teach, I am the bread. I'm the bread from heaven. I'm the bread you need to eat. He provides it multiple times. So it's corruption, it's leaven that is proliferating. I mean, this is what leaven does. It sort of it goes throughout the whole loaf of bread, or the lump of bread dough, and it just eats all the different sort of gluten strands, and it just keeps working through the bread until it doesn't have any food left to eat. And so that's sort of the picture of corruption that is given here. But it could also be like the leaven of the gospel. We want to have we want to be a good leaven, like salt and light for the world. We want God's things to proliferate, but he's warning them of the opposite, that there's a proliferation of this rationalism, of this religious disbelief. But it's not just religious disbelief; it's also with the worldliness of Herod. He's really pointing out that they're the same thing. Um, Sinclair Ferguson, in his book On the Whole Christ, he points out that legalism and antinomianism, which is a perfect example of these two groups. The Pharisees would be, far too law-keeping, and Herod would be sort of the antinomian, like he doesn't keep any laws. But they're really both lawless, right? They're not worshiping the God of heaven. They're not listening to Jesus, the law giver himself. So they're both really on the same team. And I think it's a lot hard for people to swallow that you can be a legalist, but that really just means you're lawless, right? Because you're trying to live to a law, but you don't, if you saw the lawgiver, you would stone him for collecting twigs on the Sabbath, which is like basically what they tried to do to Jesus, like multiple times, right?
Right.
Like you don't stone the lawgiver, people.
Right. Well, I think it's even stunning that on the Sabbath they meet together to plot murder, and they don't get that that's not right under the law. That's just stunning to me that that would be their
Premeditated
plan.
murder is, not right. Yeah, I guess that's breaking the commandments, isn't it? So, yeah. Yeah, I think this is potentially confusing, but it's not super confusing if you.
No, I think that was a nice summary of it. And David, anything you want to add to that, bring out in particular?
Um, well, I'll probably reiterate some of the things that were said, but I think, Jesus obviously has in mind, well, many things, but the recent encounter he just had with these Pharisees and Sadducees that had ill intent under, the cloak of asking him to do something miraculous, okay? And they're always testing. They're never just receiving and accepting. When Jesus talked about the type of faith that the disciples are to have, it's like a little child. You see and you receive, you hear and you accept the things of God. But, the Pharisees and Sadducees that he just interacted with and has continually come up against, they're out asking something that they're demanding be their way, or explaining something that God has just offered that's miraculous in, a demonic answer to it or something. They've got these little things that if you accept, their incorrect way of looking at things, that idea is going to permeate your worldview and your life. And you got to be aware of that. He's trying to make them aware of, spiritual truths. Of course, the disciples, they obviously are probably a little anxious because they forgot bread, and they're probably got a responsibility that they failed in, and so they answer out of the natural. And Jesus is like, guys, there's something far more important. You got to be understanding here. And so he teaches them about the truth that he wants to convey here concerning a heart condition, concerning false teachings. And he basically says, come on, look what I've done. Something kind of a sidelight that I didn't bring up in the feeding of the 4,000 that comes up here. Well, two things. Last time we talked about how higher criticism and other critics of the Bible say the feeding of the 4,000 is like a sloppy rewriting of the 5,000 that got just thrown in there. Is there really two? Well, Jesus makes it very clear here. There were two feedings, okay? And there were two situations that they should have known. We talked about the differences that distinguished them. But one of the arguments here that there were actually two feedings is Jesus said so, right down here.
Yeah, I'm
The other
glad you
thing
brought
is,
that up because
yeah,
that's a real practical example of letting Scripture interpret Scripture for you,
right.
right? Search out the Scriptures and see where you can find what it says about what you're reading about in one place. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing, kind of aside, like when I was a child, I was always bothered that when he had the food, just 5 loaves and 2 fish, and fed 5,000, he got just 5 baskets back. And then when he fed a smaller group later in his ministry, he gets he gets 12 baskets back in the 5,000, and we feeds a smaller group, he only gets 7. And as a child, I thought, is Jesus losing power? And I was so happy to find out that the two words baskets here are two different words, and they're used in the stories too. And when he says, when I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full? 12. That word for baskets there is more like the lunch basket, the hand basket. When he comes down here and said, I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets? Well, some translations just say baskets there as well. But it's a word for a large basket. In fact, it is the size of basket. It's the word used for the basket that Paul gets in when he's let down outside the wall. So it's like a hamper. It's like something a man could be in. And so then I was like, yes, Jesus is just as powerful as he was in the early part of his ministry. That's childlike thinking. But just in case anybody's wondering about that,
It's not
they
the
only had 12
size of
lunch
the
baskets
basket.
before that.
It's
They
the
had
number of
7
baskets that's important.
7 large.
12 baskets. 12 is an important number.
Oh, it was important. In fact, what it
The
meant is
7 is another important number.
each of those disciples had lunch for the next day when they had a trip.
That's right.
But 12
Yeah.
is, the
Now, are
number
we
of
delving into numerology here? What's happening?
seven's the number
It's
of
not,
completion. Yeah,
it's called
Jesus did a
biblical
complete work.
theology.
Okay.
One
Do you want to
basket for
explain the
each of the
importance,
12
Lucas?
tribes.
Okay, go ahead.
And then 7 is, the number of perfection, right? So
perfection,
Oh,
completion.
okay.
The
Right.
I thought you were going to go 7
days
is the
of the
number of
week,
continents or something.
provision for 7 days, time.
But another thing, to get back in a little more serious, another thing that Lucas brought up that I think is really important is, leaven is being used as an example of something that permeates and affects the whole. Now, a lot of times people look at leaven and they look at a passage here and they think, leaven must represent sin, and it often does. But it doesn't just represent sin. It represents that which can permeate and affect the whole. And Lucas brought up the leaven of the gospel, and there's the parable of the woman who puts the leaven into a measure of bread, of wheat, and it permeates the whole loaf, and that's even used for the kingdom of God and its
Right.
effects. Leaven
You've both anticipated my questions that I had for this section, so that's great. I mean,
We're just
yeah, leaven
firing on
leaven
all
is not
cylinders
just
tonight.
sin. It often is used in that. The
right.
Israelites at Passover would get the leaven out of the house, and it was like a purifying type of act. That's not all it represents.
Yeah, and I think those kinds of things are important for someone to have in mind in the reading of the scripture, that to not lock in necessarily on something being only representative of one thing. That's not how it always works through scripture. And so having that awareness, being alert to the use of the same idea or figure, but it representing
Yeah, and I think
something.
it's used often for sin because we are often admonished to guard our hearts, to guard our eyes, to guard our conscience. I mean, as Christians, we got to realize that we can still fall subject to taking in what we ought not be taking in on the basis of, I mean, certainly we need to be aware of the means by which falsehoods are conveyed, but you can get sucked into some things that uh, can start distorting your thinking. And so you got to be aware of, we've got people who, under the guise of Christianity, throw leaven out there.
Well, this is, I'm just going to go on this tangent. You can pull back in a second here, but this is why, even as a kid, I was always very skeptical of like Christian rap and Christian heavy metal. And it just was seemed like such a bizarre, like, why do you want to bring that into Christianity? Like, what's the benefit to Christianity? It seems like you're diluting Christianity, or you're letting in sort of like maybe some wicked uh outside cultural influences that don't really have anything to do with Christianity. Um, just a simple example. That's the first thing that comes to mind, is letting the church sort of follow these cultural trends to be culturally relevant. And then what do you can you even find the church later on, or is it just completely eaten out? Like the yeast eats out all the sugar from the loaf of bread. I actually don't know. I'm not much of a baker. I don't know what happens if you just let the yeast keep going, but I'm gonna guess that the bread doesn't taste good or gets hard when you bake it. I don't know, but yeah, leavening influences. I actually think thinking about it normatively is the other way. Like God's goodness is normatively what grows, and sin is is as privation, means you're avoiding the good, but we can grow in the ways in which we avoid the good, grow um, weary, we can grow faithless, we can grow in love with the things of the world and lose our love for those good things. I think that's what we have today in our culture, where we just grow senseless to what is good when we start debating pronouns and alternative sexual ideologies. We're just losing our bearings. Like we've lost the positive, the growth of the positive, and that's what this country grew on, was the growth of the positive culture of Reformed Christianity. We're kind of moving away from that now.
Yeah. No, I think what you bring up as far as um, you know, the rap, the heavy metal, Paul warned that not only do we have to preach the true and right gospel, but we need to be uh, concerned of the means by which we do something, how one builds. That's important. And I think, like you said, trying to be culturally relevant can end up being bringing in a leaven that you don't want. Um, and then along those lines, well, we all now I can't even think of the guy's name. Well, anyway, there was another pastor, not that one that I was trying to think of that I can't think of, that was known for his stand for Reformed Christianity, even wrote for Ligonier. He's not on staff, but he participated in things, and he just posted his uh, participation, not in actually performing, but in being in the pictures of and liking pictures of his own daughter getting married to another lesbian. And he had nothing up there countering it. And yeah, that's another leaven that creeps into the church.
I'm
And
not familiar with it. Is this recent?
yes,
Oh,
it was John Thorne, something like that.
Well, if we're
okay.
not sure, we maybe not say.
I don't know.
but-
I should throw it out there. But anyway, it was recently published on another podcast. But we also know the advice that what's his name gave?
Alistair
Al-Shabed.
Begg.
Yeah, that was the one I wasn't thinking of before, and I have sympathies with being put into a hard situation and how to respond. And the excuse or reason given, often or apologetic, for him was that he answered from the heart of a compassionate pastor. And we got to be careful that we let feelings drive our response that ends up now becoming the pastor's position, and maybe is the recommendation, and now is the acceptance of, when he said, "Oh, go to the wedding of your grandchild that's entering
Yeah. Well,
what they
so
call a
many people.
marriage," and we know it biblically is not, and
Alistair
take
Begg,
him a gift, and
when he doubled down on that the night when he was called out, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got caught," and then he doubled down and said,
yeah,
"No, I'm British. I'm not even American, and I'm not a fundamentalist." It's like, well, if you're not a fundamentalist, then you can sin in the innumerable ways. Like,
yeah. He
what does
didn't
that even
handle it.
mean?
He has not handled, I don't think appropriately, the counter. But again, just I mean,
We
we
know
could
you
go on a
British
whole
are
discussion on that, but
all
I view
corrupt.
that as leaven.
Talking
Even
about
if it
corruption.
was that he didn't come back
Did I say
the way
that?
he did, I mean, he could have still been soft enough that was leaven. He dropped in there that maybe it's leaven that's entered his own heart that we got to be careful of, and that's what Jesus
Yeah.
is warning of here.
Yeah, there's certain things he could have said, like, you know what? I wouldn't go to the wedding, but I would love, or maybe he did say I wouldn't go to the wedding. He did, I think he said something like, at
I
least he
don't know.
said get a gift or something. Recognize it in some way. But
Yeah, no, you
I
can't
think
you
you
can't
can, I think you could
celebrate
still love
sin.
your daughter and like have her over for dinner, and you could even have her friend over. I think one of the things that Rosaria Butterfield said was if you have these kind of people in your household, you don't lie to them and reinforce like I'm so glad you got married or whatever. You say, well, this person is your friend. You can't legitimately be married if you're not. And I'm going to be nice to this person, but I'm not going to consider them your spouse or whatever.
Yeah.
And that could
No,
end the relationship, But yeah, being partial to the truth and going with their lie. I mean, that's what they've been pushing for the last decade.
yeah.
Is
And
that
I
you?
think you bringing up Rosaria Butterfield's a good example of a proper recognition of leaven, because she used to articulate that in order to, because she's very relational in her evangelism. And the gospel comes with a house key type of approach to things, but
Hmm.
she had started out with utilizing the pronouns that the other individual wanted
Yeah.
as, the loving thing to do, but she has backed off on that and said it was
Yeah. She
wrong.
realized by doing that, you're lying
Yeah,
to
she
and
found
with them.
herself, supporting a lie. Right.
Bearing the false witness at that point. Yeah.
But she
Yeah.
repented of that
Yeah,
publicly.
that's what I'm saying. She's a good
Yeah.
example of one who realizes an action that came from a compassion because of a love that they wanted to be able to have a relationship in order to share the gospel because somebody did that to her and she came out of that lifestyle. But she came to the realization that no, how we build is just as important, what means we use. And she can't be
Like,
participating in, yeah,
in
false
going to a
witness
gay
and can't
wedding,
present the gospel.
first of all, you're tacitly by your presence, you're a witness,
Uh-huh.
and you look like you are celebrating because that's what it is celebration of something, right? A
Yeah.
wedding. And it seems like you're celebrating a wedding even by being there, and I think that's different from like my cousin's marrying a girl I don't like, you know. Well, is she a female? Like, then that's still legitimate marriage, even if I don't
Yeah.
like her,
Yeah.
right? Or I don't think he should do it, but it's still legitimate ordinance of God.
Yeah.
But what these people are doing is not in any way legitimate.
So, to speak maybe not so specifically, um, I think this does bring up a challenge, um, being uh, part of a church, and oftentimes an assumption is made that, oh, that person's coming to church, so I assume that they are a Christian, and I mean that's good, right? I mean we want to treat those as brothers unless we have some reason, brothers and sisters, I should say, unless we have some reason to not. But it can be, I think it can be important to have an awareness of the fact that there are potentially those in the church that are similar to a Pharisee or something, that they're actually a source of leaven in this way within a local body, and having some discernment about that. And I'm not saying run around being accusatory, right? But I'm just saying having an awareness that um, that not, if you're teaching a Sunday school class, right, not necessarily every person who's regularly attending has actually regenerate. They may be very interested in what's happening, but they need to hear the gospel, and there needs to be discernment. Do you follow what I'm saying with that? That um, you know, membership doesn't
For
guarantee
sure.
that you're a Christian, and if you're not, um, sadly, some are their intention is to actually be disruptive, right? I mean, certainly not all that are searching and trying to understand the faith and whatever, but I think just having that discernment within a body. You're the pastors, you figure out what I'm saying
It's
and
hard
make
to
it make sense.
discern sometimes because you can have a guy who just is like real hard to teach for a moment, but he's honestly working through stuff and he does come around. And then you can have guys who just like want to fight week in and week out. I haven't had that experience. I have wonderful people, but I've seen it. And you're like, I'm pretty sure you got like some real spiritual issues. Like maybe you don't have a regenerate spirit at all. You just want to come and fight with the pastor, you know. So
Right.
again, all the people in my church are just saints. So
I'm
Yeah.
sure that's
Well,
true.
Paul addresses some of this, like at the end of Romans, he has one last instruction for that church, which was known for its faith throughout the known world. And he says, now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you learned and avoid them. Basically, he says, turn your back on them. but they've got to demonstrate it. He'll tell Titus after one or two rebukes of these kind of people who basically demonstrate that they're not wanting to learn, but are there to cause contention. He uses the same word, avoid them, turn your back on them. And that's going to take discernment. Are they somebody who's struggling with something and want to know, and it's hard for them to give up what they have held on to if it's a false belief? Or are they there because, they're they've got a contentious spirit, and that they're always contending, they're dividing, they're causing divisions in the church because of their attitude. Paul both told Titus and Timothy, you know, warnings like that, and not to contend, over things to no profit, and to the basically the damage of the hearers. People who hear you contending over something that's not getting anywhere, because the person doesn't want to learn or whatnot. It can be damaging to others around you.
That's
Yeah,
right. I mean, yeah, there can be almost a shipwrecking of the faith of others because of those circumstances. And then on the other side, having a conversation like this, I'm certain there would be a number, not necessarily with any ill motive, but just as a kind of a natural reaction is, okay, yeah, this is where the church gets all judgmental, and they're being judgmental of people. But the point is that at that point, if the church is just accepting of whatever, well, that's being judgmental too. It just happens to be judgmental in favor of, right? I
well,
mean,
they're accepting of whatever, except somebody who says, "Well, the word of the Lord says this about that."
right, right.
I
So
mean,
it is a challenge. I mean, it's a real not that I've been in the position of having to manage this, but I imagine it's a difficult road to walk to manage those dynamics within a church
yeah,
body.
managing people is difficult, but but
I've been in
yeah,
that
no,
position of
you're
managing
bringing up,
people.
it is a good point. That's why you need to pray for discernment, but we are to judge with spiritual judgment. Um, and judgment is promoted in the Bible. It has to happen, but you don't judge rashly. You don't judge without first assessing yourself and taking the log out of your own eye so you can help your brother with a speck in his eye. There's those kind of things. People get off by saying, well, don't judge lest you be judged. You're not supposed to judge. Well, there's a lot more to what's taught, right?
Right,
In the
right.
Bible about it. And judgment happens all the time, but we need to judge rightly. We need to judge lovingly. We need to judge uh, not rashly, um, and with a pure motive. I mean, these things need to be a part of our relationship, and at times the judgment is going to be you're not wanting to be a learner. Okay, it's like I told my daughter one time when we were homeschooling, and she was young, and she was just being, you know, impertinent about the way she wanted to do something, and the way I was trying to explain it, she wasn't wanting to follow. And I said, look, you don't have a heart of a learner. And I set her on the stairs and I said, when you have a heart of a learner, you come back and we're going to start teaching. And maybe you got to do that with somebody in the church.
You can have the specific pew for those people. Go sit on that pew, and
They're in
when you're ready.
timeout right now.
I mean, you have to snicker because it is so challenging, right? It can become
Oh, it is.
frustrating.
And you don't want to improperly judge an offense. So
Right.
yeah, it has to come with a good amount of prayer and discernment and counsel sometimes.
And I'm certain that in those cases where you have strong biblical leadership, it's not the first time somebody exhibits something that boom, they're just on them and carrying out some kind of discipline or something. My guess is that most strong biblical leadership in a church is far more patient with these circumstances than not,
Yeah.
would be
Yeah,
my
you
guess.
may not know where the person is coming out of. Something might have struck a chord that's been a big struggle of theirs, and that's what they're reacting to. Or maybe, they've mixed emotions from another situation in their life. Yeah, there has to be room for allowing somebody to have a bad day, somebody to actually be struggling with a teaching or a doctrine that just doesn't sit well, and that's why you need to test it over time. Are
Yeah,
they
also
somebody really
for
wanting to know?
those out there that are listening, I think we're saying a lot of it from the perspective of a pastor. Like, we just need to be patient with people. But those who are seeking the truth, or maybe you're frustrated with your pastor, talking to your pastor 5 minutes after the sermon where he's just been, focused on running worship service or whatever, instead of, giving time for your questions to get worked out, bring questions and say, don't answer me now, answer me like by in an email, give me some resources, be teachable. Say, how do I understand this better? I've had a lot of people come after the service, and sometimes they're visitors, and they're like, don't you think this? And I say, well, actually, I'm not really thinking that, dispensational way or whatever. I was preaching about Noah putting lots of food on the ark so that the animals have food for the next year because they were on the ark for, you
Oh,
know, a good 12 months. Don't you think we should be preppers? Did this as a commandment to be preppers? And I said, no, no. I said, I don't think it's a sin to be a prepper, but and I'm pretty sure she was offended. Like, she kept saying it over and over again. But don't you think we should save water in case the world comes to an end? I was like, I think if you want to, you could, but if you don't want to, that's not a sin. And anyways, I think people need to be patient on both sides
right.
and open to
Good.
learning.
So back to our story here in these verses 14 through 21. Um, and you may not be able to answer this now. Maybe you can send me an email. No, I don't know. Maybe you can give me some resources. But it would be interesting to me to know if there's a way to know kind of the tone of voice of Jesus. I mean, I take him like he's the pastor of this small congregation of disciples, and this issue has arisen, right? Like, guys, you're thinking like just the wrong direction here. And to me, it'd be interesting if there was some clue in the original here that could help us know what's how is Jesus saying this? Because I know that we have this general thinking that, well, be like Jesus. He's always nice. Well, I think he's nice at times, right? But is he sometimes stern or a little more intense than just like the encouraging word that so often happens in church? Well, let's just love on them, and that'll, if we just love on them. And I know I don't know what that really means to just love on somebody, right? I think
Well,
everybody thinks they know what that means,
in
but
the last passage, didn't Jesus instruct them sternly? Like, so.
oh yeah, yeah. At the end of chapter 7, are you saying that? Is that where we saw that?
Yeah, it was fairly recently, the end of
Um,
7, maybe. Yeah.
and he charged them that they should tell no man, but the more he charged them, are you thinking about that
Is
part right
that
there?
loving on them? Is that
Well, I don't know. Okay, I'm
commanding
not sure I
them?
know what loving on them actually entails, but um,
And
I just
Jesus loved on
I
them.
think,
Where does it
yeah.
say, and Jesus loved on them?
Well, yeah,
Show me
he
the
definitely had
chapter and
compassion on them,
verse.
but I think that you can find plenty of places where you can read that Jesus spoke sternly, especially to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Um, he'll rebuke them, calling them snakes and things like that. When he cleansed the temple, I'm sure his language was not "I love you," whip, you know. Um,
well, he
but
actually made that whip in order
he
to
did.
do
He
it. I
took the
just say
time
he
to
didn't just
braid
pick
the
up a
cords.
random whip.
That was his time of getting a little more control before he. No, I don't know. But here, I think these are hard questions. They're not questions to make the person feel good. They're the question to alert them to their foolish thinking. He says, um, first of all, he says, why do you reason because you have no bread? What are you thinking about? That's not what I'm talking about. Do you not perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? I mean, I guess you could say that in a loving way, but still it's hitting
Oh, come on.
the heart of the matter.
If you were to speak to somebody in today's generation and say that, they would be offended by it. They would be hurt. That
Yeah,
hurts me.
we live in an easily offensive generation.
Yeah.
The goal
I
is to be
mean,
offended. But yeah, and maybe they were offended some, but they also realize who they have realized more and more who Jesus is, and they're like they're probably more ashamed that they've fallen so short of their teacher. But he's saying, you have eyes, but you can't see. You have ears, and you're not hearing, and don't you even have a memory. I mean, I've probably talked this way to my students sometimes, not even
Yeah.
halfway perfect like Jesus would, but it's like, oh, come on. We just talked about this, right? And you use that kind of language to make them go, oh, yeah, I guess I should know something. What is it? It's a learning. It's kind of like a little rap on the side of the head of your students to make them be more attentive.
let's wrap them on the knuckles, not the side of the head, but I
Okay,
get you.
rap.
So,
You take your little pencil and knock their knuckles.
Lucas, go
Sorry.
ahead.
one more thought. I mean, we know lots of things about Jesus. We know they spoke with authority. He taught with authority. Certainly, verse 14 again here, he enjoins them, uh, or not verse 14, 15. He enjoins them. He charges them. That's the same word that we had back in the last chapter, right? Where he
Okay.
commands. So he's instructing sternly here. But also, I think it really has helped me to read both the prophets and people like John, the baptizer, and Jesus, or any of the apostles. When you read them with that prophetic pleading, which is the way you have to read, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, that all those oracles of judgment, followed by the oracles of the silver lining, like the mercy and the grace that's in store, the new covenant promises. When you read with that voice of covenant pleading, like, hey guys, listen, you are on thin ice here if you start reasoning like the Pharisees and Herod. This is dangerous waters. You need to beware. There's warning in that way of speaking. Hey, I want to warn you. If you don't avoid this, you're gonna start reaping these kinds of rewards, which are not going to be good. He's using prophetic language here, like the hardened heart, Ezekiel 36. I'm going to replace your heart of stone with a heart of flesh. They know what he's talking about. They know that they've heard him talk about not hearing and not perceiving. There was a verse that came up in one of the commentaries from Ezekiel 14 or whatever, which basically said the same thing. Like, these guys, these Pharisees are, deaf and dumb. They don't see, they don't hear, and you guys are doing the same. I'm warning you, you guys are going to be in the same league with these guys. You're not going to be if you start thinking like that. So I think it's, instead of, sort of this, like, we read everything with like sarcasm and maybe a little bit of a negative sort of uh, view, philosophically, uh, kind of postmodern. And I think we should just read this sort of as an Old Testament prophet. But certainly the Holy Spirit and Christ were working in those prophets. So it's good to read them in sort of sync with each other.
Well, it seems to me like there's kind of as a general outline of what Jesus is doing, he's he gives them the charge. This is the concern. This is the thing to be mindful of. He then illustrates to them how their reasoning, the disciples' reasoning, is along the same lines of that. But then when he goes to the recent miracles, it's as though he's showing them, but here's the provision that I have for you. Here's how I provide. Here's what you should be seeing. Your reasoning should be like, maybe their reasoning should have been, oh, we've only got one loaf. Oh, that's no problem. We've got Jesus here, right? Like maybe that's where the reasoning should have gone. And so, when you mention the silver lining, that's like the salvation message that follows the here's your sin, right?
Oh yeah, here's your sin, but hey, you have an opportunity to repent, and God's merciful, and He's going to accept it. You're
That's
pre-approved.
helpful. That's helpful. David, did you have something you wanted to bring up that?
Sure, anytime.
Okay.
No, I think that, yeah, he brought him, his last question is, and do you not remember? And so I think in bringing up what had occurred, not only is he demonstrating, look, I can provide for this, but he's helping them understand that you don't reason without the knowledge of what you've been given. The history that you have been taught. You don't just think of the moment in the immediate. And he's basically showing them the foolishness of thinking just moment by moment and not remembering all that has gone on before. In fact, here Jesus has done these things. Paul's going to say all that was written before was an example for us to learn and know. And he's talking about all the Old Testament. And so we could take this in terms of our frame of reference that we live by has got to be all that God has given us. And certainly for these disciples, it was that which was so immediate. And then, he says next, and he said to them, how is it that you do not understand? And then what follows there? I don't have it up on mine. That's where it ends in Mark. In Matthew, he does tell what the disciples did finally realize. And in Matthew 16:12, after he says, how do you not understand? Matthew has him say, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So he brings out the explanation there in Matthew. Mark leaves it, and you should be able to discern that from the flow, but Matthew was led to put it in there, and it can help confirm what you should be.
Right. So, but Matthew's audience is the Jews themselves, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they need more explanation. No, I don't know. They need more careful explanation. Those Mark we consider writing for more
it
Roman
may
audience,
be.
right?
He's writing particularly Romans.
Yes.
But for the Roman culture. And it may be that, Matthew's more aware that how, the Jew is dealing with forsaking the leadership he's always had for Christ.
Yeah.
And so Matthew may be led to emphasize it's their teaching, it's their doctrine, it's like leaven, it's going to permeate your life. That's what we're warning you about.
Yeah, one other thing that comes out in all of this, and we're probably at a point where we need to wrap up now, but several times both of you have talked about the kind of reasoning that happens. And I think it is important to keep in mind that those who do not acknowledge God and his righteousness, right? Those, as in, we could read the description in Romans 1, it does actually affect reasoning ability, right? And so these people they can be really smart people, but they make wrong judgments and come to wrong conclusions. And they can be smarter than any of us about any particular subject, physics or nuclear physics or whatever, and yet they're coming to wrong conclusions, and it's ultimately rooted not in their knowledge of the subject, but in this position of not being thankful to God, not being submitted to God as the source of wisdom. Is that, you follow what I'm saying with that?
Suppressing the truth and unrighteousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why
Flex your mind.
Paul will say in Romans 12 that we need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And that is how we actually are changed into a place where we can actually offer ourselves a living sacrifice to God to be used of Him. But yeah, if we stay in the framework of humanistic reasoning or some other earthly oriented faulty reasoning and don't have our fundamental presuppositions rooted in the truths of God's word, yeah, we're going to be in the wrong mind. We want to let this mind be in us that was in Christ Jesus. We want to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Um, there's a radical change between living in accordance to the world's standard and living according to the truths of the Bible.
All right. Well, I didn't necessarily plan on so much discussion growing out of those verses, but I appreciate it. I think we touched on a lot of very practical concerns. But I think things that come to people's minds who are new to the church, or well, what is this whole Christianity thing, and how is it working? I think there's a lot of helpful discussion that we had through that section. So, Lucas, any last thoughts you want to give here?
Yeah, and we got really caught up in that, and there's so much good stuff there. But that's like the whole Gospel of John. I mean, for me, is struggling with that sort of dualistic worldview, not being able to see God's ways like you see in your own worldview, and you're in a sense blind to the truth of what God has. And we think it's, enlightenment. We think it's, we're thinking scientifically. We're thinking like modern people. We're not thinking like these religious zealots who are blinded to the truth. Well, Jesus is saying that you're blinded to the truth. So who's right? Who's right? Is it the worldliness that's blinding you, or is it religion? And Jesus's claim is very counter. It's the exact opposite of what the world would have you believe, that their faith is blind. I was listening to, I know we're cutting this off, but I was listening to, or I saw a description of a podcast of this atheist, described him as a devout atheist. And I was like, that's such a weird thing to say about an atheist. Like, devout means you're like dedicated to it with like a religious fervor, right? So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Good. David, any last thoughts you want to share?
Oh, no, I think I've kind of given what I want to say about it.
Okay.
I think that it is, you said we had a lot of discussion that came out of it. I think it lends itself to that because ultimately you've got to leave the teachings of this world and you need to adopt the truths of God's word to frame your mind after that.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, thanks for viewing the video, and please do the whole YouTube thing, like and share, and as I've said on other live streams, when you share a video, you don't have to share necessarily the whole thing. Oftentimes people, a video is shared and, oh, that's an hour 15. I don't have time for that. If there's some part of what we just went through here, maybe at the 33-minute mark, um, sorry for conspiracy theorists, I know 33 is a whole thing, but maybe at that mark, there's something that you talked with someone about, and what we discussed here could be helpful. You can actually share with that timestamp on your share and just ask them, hey, just watch the next 3 or 4 minutes there, and that can be a way to start sharing our videos and getting others to see parts of them, and that could be enough to intrigue them to become a regular viewer. So so when we say share, don't think, well, I'm not sharing a full hour and 30-minute video or something. That's fine. Find a part that's relevant maybe to what's going on in your life or a friend's life, and have them just watch 3 or 4 minutes, and that's good too. But thanks for being a part. Thanks for staying with us. If you're new to this, you can go to the Bradford Christian College channel, click on the playlist, and the playlist for our Exploring a Sketchbook of Christ, and you can catch up from past videos. And please send comments, emails. We'd love to field questions. We'd love to hear reactions to what we're doing. So again, thanks for viewing. Please do join us next week for another episode of The Lantern's Quest.